and reality around what some of the flexible working looks like across the roles and how we describe that as an organisation to our staff and officers.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Katie. I mean, that analysis of data is really helpful, and as you're aware, those broad numbers I'm aware of. Is there an ability to look deeper in that data in terms of role profiles and locations and things like that, to see if is there disproportionality in that, or is that too complex at this stage?
And before you come back, Katie, I'd be interested to know the definition of part-time hours. So, you know, is part-time 35 rather than 25 or 20?
So part-time will be anything below the standard contracted hours that we would have within the organisation. I do think that there are some nuances to the data that we can get to. I think on officers, in some ways, that's easier because we can kind of look across ranks and then within particular teams. With staff, that's a little bit more difficult because, as we know, we have one different job description for every 7 members of staff in the organisation. So therefore, actually looking by role is quite difficult. But what we could do is to try and look at, again, kind of almost a heat map. What we are hearing from within the organisation, though, is a sense that any flexible working agreements that are put in place are not being reviewed regularly. So actually, you know, where staff are perhaps moving teams or moving roles, they're taking those arrangements with them automatically, if I can use that word. And in some cases, that's right. But in other cases, as an organisation, to Emma's point around operational requirements, we have to look at that flexible working pattern within the context of a team and what the requirements are. So I know that we have a piece of work that needs to be done in relation to that as well. So yes, we can do more on the data. We will do more on the data. I think it's that bit up front, though. What conversations or applications aren't happening for cultural reasons? And then if you are working flexibly, does that inhibit your progression through the organisation for those who want to progress?
Okay, thanks, Katie. Okay, I'm going to ask Rob then if you want to come in with a brief comment.
Chair, thanks very much. It was really just to commend the approach taken by ACC Bond in terms of the set and work. You know, she mentioned there around about the conversations that have started and the feeling that it's kind of moved beyond the ownership of a single senior figurehead sort of thing. And I think that's a really important thing when we're talking about securing cultural change. It's almost a bit of a kind of grassroots movement, and that's something that we're not always comfortable with as a service, because it feels that we're perhaps ceding control and consistency. But actually, what we're seeing is people at all ranks understanding the vision of actually trying to make us a much more equal and equitable service and tackle some of these institutional issues, which I think over the longer term will be much more likely to secure the necessary change and cultural change within the organisation.
Okay, that's grand. Thanks, Rob. So the conundrum I have, and I think you've been explicit about it, Emma, and it's implied within a lot of work, is how do we bring everything together? So and be able to, because in a way the People Committee is indifferent to all of the streams of work. We need to know about outcomes. We need to check that things are moving forwards across warranted officers and staff. And in particular, I think, Tom, for the Policing Together Oversight Group. And we know that people talk about the clunkiness of 2 or 3 different approaches when actually one would do. So it's maybe for officials to think through the reporting arrangements and how we do that in a comprehensive way. Katie, have you an answer for us?
In part. So and maybe it touches upon one of the agenda items that we have, which is around implementation plans, 3.1 for people strategy and SWP and dashboards. So perhaps we can pick it up when we get to that about how we're trying to pull it together through that.
Well, I think if I'm seeing no one else wanted to come in, Emma, thank you for that. I think look forward to seeing more focused outcome measures at our next committee meeting, and we'll move on then to the people strategy and SWP, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. So we put this as a verbal update. So we are working to the next People Committee 30th of May. And for that, two quite significant pieces of work. One is around the implementation plans for both the Strategic Workforce Plan and also People Strategy that were approved at the end of last year. And then the other one is the development of the dashboards. So previously we had talked about kind of strategic workforce dashboards being around kind of leadership, learning, well-being, etc. And actually from the work that we've done in engaging with stakeholders, actually what we're going to do is probably go horizontal with the dashboards so that the dashboards talk to each of the outcomes in the people strategy and strategic workforce plan. The idea being behind that then is to somehow try and pull together all of the pieces of work that are happening across the way. So if we look at some of the outcomes that relate to equality, that enables us on the dashboard and in the implementation plans to pull together the work within tackling sexism, misogyny, wider policing together work, HMICS audit reports, BDO audit reports, and kind of the workforce dashboard data. So we are working towards May. There's a lot of work happening in the background. We are trying to automate the data as we go through this as much as possible as well. So I think we should have a good product for May, for a good discussion that enables People Committee to scrutinise our plans around both implementation but also the evidence-based reporting that you are asking for.
That's helpful. Thanks very much for that. Look forward to seeing what's coming to our next committee meeting. Colleagues, content with that? Okay, so if we stay with you, Katie, in terms of the workforce report.
Thank you. So again, I'll take this as read. A couple of key points of insight that I would like to pull out is through the work that the recruitment team have been undertaking in terms of analysis. We're really starting to focus much more on candidate journey. So recognizing the employment market in which we are operating at the moment and some of the further challenges we have around attraction, particularly for police officer roles. So this report calls out that 11.5% of officer applications are actually successful. So that starts to tell us then as an organisation what the pipeline is, the pool of potential candidates, the size of that we need to be able to approach, to attract, and then to move through the recruitment process in order to get to the number of successful candidates that we are needed for each intake. In addition to which, we now have very good data that tells us that the average time it takes to recruit an officer from application through to joining is 241 days. We know against market data that candidate expectations, particularly different generations, that is not hitting the mark. So we need to look at end-to-end process in relation to that. We also know that for staff, we have 5.7% success rate. So it's very low, I would say, compared to other benchmarks. But we will also say that it's taking 146 days on average to recruit a member of staff. Again, we know when you look at some industry averages and some of the organisations that we might be competing against broader than public sector, 146 days is too long. Some candidates are getting an outcome within 30 days. We are losing candidates is what I'm saying. So we've got a big push here on what is it that we can do around the candidate journey and the back end processes and what that looks like. The only other points I would call out, 2.2.3, we have an independent general practitioner who is undertaking a review of the medical standards at the moment. So we will report that back once that's concluded. And the only other points I would call out are in relation to absence. So we can see at 2.5 in terms of officer absence, that sits at 6.53%. And that's circa about £55 million of lost productivity. And for staff, the absence is 7.8%. And again, that's circa about £22 million. So this is really the first time that we are getting much smarter at putting a pound sign, I guess, against some of the cost, both for individuals who are impacted by absence, but also for the organisation. So when we start to talk about officer numbers and kind of whatever the number might be and potential turnover, we are also now starting to deep dive into what extraction rates look like. So when you're looking at absence and average absence, when you're looking at modified officers, etc., so that you can actually start to look at availability of the workforce. And that's really what the direction of travel, for example, that we would move to in the dashboards. So I'm happy to take any questions in relation to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Yeah, sorry, the couple of stats you came up with about a length of time to hire people, is that from start of the process until they start, or until they've had an offer and accepted it?
No, it's start, and actually the majority of that is vetting. And we know that, you know, we have to get that right. You know, we've made a very clear commitment as an organisation, but nonetheless, we're in a really competitive recruitment market at the moment. So there is this piece for us as an organisation where perhaps we've slipped back a little bit about putting candidates at the centre of what we're doing and almost becoming, you know, just so focused on what that experience is, and therefore the referrals, you know, that kind of, you know, one good service and how many people talk about, rather than I really wouldn't bother applying, you're not going to hear for months and months and months. So it's a stark stat that does pose very significant challenges for us as an organisation.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely understand that from my career in the past, that you apply for something, it goes into the dark ether and you have no clue, you can't plan anything, and you're certainly not holding out your hopes, so you go off and find something else. So yeah, no, that's really helpful, thank you.
Any other asks from colleagues? I've got a couple of things then, Katie. You've talked about the percentage of absence. Do we have a figure in mind of what we think? Because clearly people are going to be unwell, they're not going to be at their work. Work's good for people's health, so we want to have people at work as best they can. Setting aside the financial implications, it's good for everyone to have more people at their work than less. Is there a sense of what one would reasonably expect from this type of work? So are the percentages we've got the best we can do, or can we improve things?
I'd always like to say we can improve things. This is an interesting one, actually, not just for us as an organisation, but other organisations I've worked in the debate around, you know, what a target might look like. And I think that for Police Scotland, I would not want to see a one figure across the board, because I think that there is so much diversity of role. I mean, we've been doing a lot more benchmarking against ONS data. And, you know, what we know, for example, is over the last 5 years, there's been an average 5% increase year on year in mental health related absences. So actually, I think as we work forward, I would like us to have an aspirational number, because I think that's good for us, and therefore we can tell as we start to evaluate the wellbeing strategy whether or not that's having any impact whatsoever. But I do think that we need to lay that against the backdrop of external data and what we can see is happening. I've used somewhere between 4 and 5% in the past, but what I would say is that I do think it's a very different pattern post-COVID of absence within workforces.
Okay, that's grand, thank you. And on that theme, given sickness absence can often be an indicator of problems with culture, how easy would it be? Because I think it would be helpful for us to see the range. So if sickness absence is 6.7, or some departments 30 and others none. So it would be helpful in due course, but it may well be that is an SWP people strategy reporting conversation that we have at our next meeting.
I would agree, and you know, the ask that you've been making of us is, yes, looking at that in terms of sickness absence, but also the nuances then we see around attrition rates, around potential grievances, etc., so that we can start to see what that looks like within particular areas. And then overlaying, you know, our data team under Tina and others have been doing an amazing piece of work where they can look almost kind of real time, for example, against assaults against officers, or officers that have been to traumatic events, so that actually we can then start to think about, well, how does that then interlace with the data that then we're seeing within the workforce?
Yeah, and what support can we put in to heal people
Yes.
so that they're not adversely affected in the longer term by working conditions.
Absolutely.
Grand, thank you, noted. So we're still with you then in terms of policy update.
Thank you. So this policy assurance report. So this was a paper that we previously brought to People Committee that actually really wanted to give committee members some visibility and assurance around our policy schedule for the year. So I'm talking employment policy when I talk about policy. There are a number of, I'm going to say, competing demands around reviewing and developing policy. So this really is across the organisation trying to pull that work into one place so that us, the Federation, our trade unions are clear on what the proposed policy work is for the year, and then how we have a framework whereby we can reprioritise policies as we need to for their review. So, for example, we know that there's been piece of work in relation to changes in legislation around flexible working. We know that there's significant other pieces coming on board that we might need to reprioritise a review. We also know within Policing Together, there's an ask for us to review a number of policies. We need to get to them, but I want a really clear plan here so that we are able to manage our workload and your expectations around that. So Appendix A lays out the proposed, as it stands at the moment, policy schedule for this year. Albeit we keep this under review at JNCC for both officers and staff.
Okay, any comments or questions? Tom?
Sure, thanks, Katie. And I know we've had the conversation around this in terms of Policing Together. There's a fundamental requirement to ensure that we don't have discriminatory policies. And while we have to prioritise for workforce workload, I'm sure people will agree that that would be the highest priority. And given our determination to drive out institutional discrimination, particularly in policies, I still see that as a high priority. Just to invite comment on that.
I'd absolutely agree that there's no doubt about that. I think what I would say is that I stand assured that all of our policies are legally compliant. What I would say, though, is that there's a number of them around tone of voice, accessibility, and again, thinking about when we develop policies, they're developed from a colleague perspective. They always, we always need to have the legal piece, but actually for me, it's about how we write policy so that we're not landing a 27-page policy on a colleague who just needs to understand, what is it that you need from me as an organisation. I do think that there are a number of other pieces as well that are coming on. So we've been asked to look at hybrid working. We've got drugs and alcohol testing, which we also need to prioritise, as well as, I say, kind of a number of other legislative changes. If there's work coming through, for example, from Policing Together, which actually is showing through, we've obviously got equalities impact assessments, but if there's something missing in a policy, there is the ability to be able to bring a policy review onto this schedule of work and reprioritise it. I think what I'm saying is that something else then kind of gets pushed down the priority list. So definitely it's there for discussion, and that in part was why we wanted this framework, was so everybody had that oversight and the ability to be able to input into the prioritisation of policies.
Okay, thank you. And can I just check the uniform and appearance? Was that an equality piece? Yeah, okay. Grand, thank you very much indeed. So we'll move on then to Vicky in terms of Forensic Services People update.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to attend the People Committee today on behalf of Forensic Services. Members will be aware that following the changes to the Forensic Services governance arrangements approved at the authority in August last year, that it was agreed that assurance on people-related matters would move from the Forensic Services Committee to the People Committee. So as such, the paper I've submitted today is really just an overview document to really set the scene in terms of people-related matters and internal governance within Forensic Services. So I'll take the paper as read, but I'll just call out a few key points, if that's okay with yourself, Chair.
Yep.
So on page 2, 1.1 really sets out the Forensic Services strategy and significantly the strategic outcome aligned to people, where our people are supported through a positive working environment, enabling them to provide excellent forensic services. And that's obviously, there's a set of strategic objectives which align with that outcome. So our main internal governance meeting, providing that oversight on people-related matters, is through our People Board. So this is quite a well-established meeting. It's supported well by Police Scotland, P&D, Equality and Diversity HR Advisor, SPA Finance, SPA Risk and Assurance, and it is also attended by our trade union colleagues. So it really just provides that visibility on recruitment, organisational change, finance, and really progresses looking at the progress of our people plan. The people plan for 24-25 is currently being developed in line with our wider Forensic Services business planning processes, and aims to really support a more mainstreaming approach to ED&I and wellbeing. We also look at people metrics and discuss these aligned with our Forensic Services performance framework, and also have embedded that risk management approach, looking at people-related risks in that meeting as well. So we've got real visibility of our people-related matters across the organisation. In terms of health and safety, again, a well-established governance structure is in place, again supported by our Police Scotland Health and Safety colleagues, and also attended by our TU colleagues as well. This reports into the Health and Safety Police Scotland Health and Safety Board as well. A final point I just want to bring out as well in terms of the report is that our new operating model, as members will be aware, within Forensic Services, was really developed with that people element in mind, and strongly through the whole model itself. We're currently in the implementation phase, and it's really around designing, it has been designed to focus on the improved overall environment for everyone within our workplace, with greater management support and empowering our people, and also career progression. So I'll pause there just to see if there's any questions from members.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. Questions or comments from members? Paul?
Yeah, I've got a few small questions. Just, and apologies if you don't have this stat to hand. In one of the previous items, Katie was talking about how long it takes to recruit a member of staff and a police officer. Do you know how long it takes on average to recruit a member of the forensics team?
Yes, thanks, Paul. Yes, we're currently looking at this in detail to really look at that overall process, but it's roughly between about 4 to 6 months.
Right.
Some of our challenges are around vetting, for example, but also in terms of the career progression opportunities that some of our recent recruitment has opened up for staff. There's often a resultant backfill or recruitment opportunity and vacancy elsewhere in the organisation. So that is one of the challenges for us at the moment.
So at the previous Forensics Committee, you mentioned that it took, that 60% of vacancies were filled in-house, which is good up to a point. But what that does do is it creates a backfill problem, and it therefore, one of the issues we've got is not getting enough staff to carry out the work, and that leads to diminution in performance. So if 60% of cases of vacancies are filled in-house, you're backing up the amount of time it takes to get that problem resolved. So what is the People Board doing about that?
Yes, thanks, Paul. As you say, it is a real positive in terms of that career progression within the organisation, particularly when we've got a number of opportunities at entry-level scientific roles within the organisation. So it's really good to see our staff moving on across both lateral and promoted posts across the organisation. So what the People Board look at, along with our recruitment meeting as well, is what the impact of any vacancies are. And what we're trying to do is look at how opportunities to think ahead and look at mechanisms whereby we can potentially look at the resultant backfill opportunities and having quicker decisions around that. We obviously use our recruitment policy and procedures within Police Scotland SPA, and again, there's opportunities around there, such as anybody who may be on reserve lists, so we can go back to candidates. But as has already been discussed, that can be challenges, can be challenging across the workforce, and people who might have applied previously, they have not been successful. We can look at backfill opportunities, but there's a significant delay there.
So an internal promotion, presumably you fill it out, the vetting process, because you don't need it. It's internal. They're already working for us.
For some roles.
Right, okay. That
So
throws
there's
up an
different levels of vetting requirement depending on roles.
Yeah, but say someone is being, entry-level scientist being promoted up to another level, presumably, there's staging posts for this. I mean, the People Committee, is that like a star chamber, or the People Board, is that like a star chamber that is stopping, adding as a break to recruitment to try and match it with resources? Or...
No, I wouldn't say so. We look at recruitment decisions on a fortnightly basis. So it's very much more as and when people either move on to other roles, resign, retire from the organisation, then it's quicker decision making around that, around where the need is for specific roles across our organisation. Okay,
and what linkage is there with Katie and her team in terms of, I mean, they're obviously trying their best to try and streamline this process. Is there any learning we can get from that for forensics, seeing as we're all part of one big organisation?
Yes, we have a dedicated recruitment team which is aligned to our forensic services recruitment needs. Good communication there again. If there are any specific issues and specific, I would say, bottlenecks across that whole system, from the initial point that a vacancy arises all the way through to recruitment, that's the detail we're working on just now in terms of where there are potential opportunities for improvement.
Great, thanks. I've just got two more things, Chair. One is 2.8, the police-led Your Leadership Matters and forensics participation in that. Just to say, I think that's great that you're involved in that. And then 2.11, there's a reference to a key capability team manager role. Is that a standalone role, or is that something that's responsibilities?
So that's a standalone role, which through our operating model development, we identified that there was a need for that first line manager role across the organisation. So it is a standalone role, and we have a number of them, around 30 across the organisation, to really focus on that people related support.
Great, no thanks. That's me, Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So if there's no other questions or comments from colleagues, Vicky, in terms of reporting arrangements and what we would expect to see, it would be helpful to have, so that's been very helpful. Thank you for that introduction and that oversight. I think it would be helpful perhaps at the next meeting to have a report of what our typical outcome measures would be that we can measure and progress, so that we can actually have evidence for our assurance. If you could work with the governance officials for that, that would be really helpful.
Yes, of course. Thanks.
Thank you. Dawn, so that you can have a complete run at your papers, I'm going to ask us to break and come back at 12:05. Thank you. reports.
Thank you very much, Chair. Starting with the Health and Safety Quarterly Report, I'd just like to point out a few things. I'll take it as read, but and I also want to emphasise that you know, there is still an appetite for me to enhance this report as we go forward. The first thing I really wanted to come back to was the action in regards to Surefire, the action point 005. I agree that this should remain ongoing. It does say proposed to close, but I agree it still has a bit of work to do in that area. A meeting was recently held with myself, a few of my team members, Service Delivery and Digital Division. Certainly enhancements have been made since the quarter two report. And that Digital Division are confident that all areas will be engaged in the next few weeks. In addition to that, they also now have access to an events calendar, and so they're deploying the earpieces in advance of those. And there are plans also to produce a communication from Health and Safety when Digital have engaged with everyone in the next few weeks to give full details again of the process for gaining access to that equipment and what requirements are needed. And then after which time, once we've got full deployment, it'll then be passed to stores where this will now become part of standard operating kit. So I would want to bring that back, if that was okay with yourself, Chair, in the next May, so that I could give you a fuller update as to where we are with that. Another couple of items I'd want to bring to your attention: lithium-ion batteries. I should say as well, sorry, Surefire is now part of the organisational risk register, as is lithium-ion batteries. We've added this to the risk register as well, as I'm going to be chairing a short life working group to bring together all the work that's taking place within the wider force. So we will have representation on that group from roads policing, digital, productions, etc., to look at all the work that's going on within the wider force to bring together and produce some form of national guidance around that. We understand the risk of in relation to fire is quite low still. However, we want to be on the front foot in terms of providing reassurance and guidance that we are working together to bring that all into one sort of national guidance for all. Some of the other issues in terms of the statistics. So we've issued some statistics there in relation to assault. You probably see on the slide, the first slide, which is number 7, that looks at the accident reporting. The during arrest and custody is quite significant. 55% of that is actually when we've done a deeper dive within custody itself. So we're engaging with the Criminal Justice Services Division on this. So we're working together with them to get a clearer picture of why that is and where we need to work with that. Again, we always caveat that with the hope that people are just reporting more when there are incidents, and we're certainly seeing that in the near miss area, that reporting has improved there. I think that was all I really wanted to bring out and highlight, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Dawn, that's helpful. Members have any questions or comments? No. I've just got a couple then. And apologies, I should know this, in terms of the way that you work. So the RPE working group, will that have staff side and trade union representative on that as a matter of course? Yeah, okay, that's grand. The other aspect was on your stats. I'm not sure, and again, it may well be that we have it reported in a different way, perhaps on an annual basis. Are these statistics quite good, or are they getting worse? So you're giving us a commentary. So I would find it helpful to see comparisons. So whether it's an SPC or a way of presenting this to show either evidence of improvement or getting worse, and what actions taken. And then the information about problems with arrest and custody. Where do we look at the the injury to people who are in custody. So this is the workforce, rightly so. Where does the injury to people who are in custody get reported to?
That still comes to us just in a different format. So it comes to us as a third party incident. And anything that in relation to that needs investigation comes from a joint investigation with ourselves and custody.
And the assurance, does that go up through people and performance? Right.
It goes to the Health and Safety Board, yeah.
Okay. People content with that. So thank you for the work that you're doing and looking at how you report things and making sure that we move forwards. And thank you for the work that you're doing on Sure Fire. So if we're staying with you then for the certificate of assurance process.
Thank you. Yes, so we launched a pilot as a proof of concept very early into the new year. I went to the divisional commanders meeting at the end of last year to inform them of the pilot and what that entailed. Even at that stage, I was given some assurance that they were really happy with the changes that we were wanting to implement around assurance and making it sort of a more thematic approach. So we carried out a short pilot with A Division and OSD, and it emphasised that it was not done in real time. So we were trying to ensure that we got some kind of outcome for the Health and Safety Board. And we also wanted to make sure that we were able to give you some assurance as well of how that worked. So we've still got a bit of work to do around about a work plan and how we're going to execute this going forward into the next financial year. But the information that we've gleaned and the feedback so far has been that this is a much improved method of giving ARSIT, Police Scotland and the SPA assurance that we are being compliant and we are reaching significant goals, and also subsequently looking to see where improvements and actions need to be taken. And we're utilising the tools, the digital tools that Police Scotland already have access to, which in terms of feedback so far have been welcomed by the people who took part in that. Some of the feedback essentially was that it has made it easier. It's made it easier for people to comply in terms of what the ask is. And it's given a way of us seeing that evidence, certainly from our health and safety advisors' perspective as well, that they're really happy that they could see that evidence as well that's been provided. We do need to come back to this committee, and we will come back with any findings that we have in terms of actions and improvements going forward. But I hope that you can see that this is an approach that you might welcome in terms of us looking at a theme, and we've picked risk assessment going forward being that theme, that we are actually complying. So I'll take any questions if you have any.
Okay, thanks for that, Dawn. Comments or questions from members or other colleagues? I suppose the question that I have is, you don't know what you don't know. And clearly in the private section, we've got work on estates coming to us. And I'm thoughtful then about how confident are we when we're asking senior leaders and managers to talk about the health and safety issues within their area, that they're actually rehearsing everything that they need to know and be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's for me really part and parcel of this. And I think from our perspective, what we're going to do looking forward is really create a sort of work plan, a sort of forecast of things that we think, based on the evidence we're gathering through scope and that accident incident near miss data, and looking at where we then take our approach going forward. I think what was happening in the past was there was a very long questionnaire that went out to divisional commanders about what they had in place, which I don't think gave us that level of assurance that we need. So I'm hoping that by making sure that we're looking at the themes around where we're seeing need to check that improvements are made and that compliance is being made, that will give us more assurance, and it will also help the health and safety team to identify any gaps that we might have in our approach, to assist and support where we can with the wider force and staff. Of course, there'll be a corporate services side to this as well, so it'll be across the entire force that we will be getting representation on from this.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Dawn. People content with that? Good. So look forward to seeing how this then develops. Thank you very much
Thank
for all
you.
your work on that. And then finally, your 3-year strategic plan.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So just to say that this has been to the Health and Safety Board, as had the Certificate of Assurance actually, and were endorsed. So this new action plan sets out to prioritise the health and safety for the next few years, looking to take the best work of the previous iteration and how we can adapt that and enhance, and really looking to digitise and simplify procedures to assist everyone in making sure that they can comply with health and safety. I've kept it quite high level and not too prescriptive, really on purpose. It's deliberate to ensure that, you know, health and safety practices change very rapidly, like every other part of the organisation does. So we need as a team to make sure that we're keeping abreast of that change, to understand any initiatives or innovations that we as an organisation can benefit from. It is there as well to ensure existing risks are effectively controlled and managed, but also where we can identify any emerging risks and make sure that they are added to our organisational risk register, and the appetite is there for everyone to collaborate to ensure that we mitigate the risks where reasonably practicable. I think the key for me for this strategy is also to empower officers and staff to make the informed decisions about their own health and safety. I think that we've definitely identified within the health and safety team where there are gaps within policies and perhaps standard operating procedures. And I think that's key to making sure that we create a really pertinent training plan as well, and that we communicate all of this effectively by having a productive intranet. So I welcomed what Katie was saying earlier in regards to having a sort of direction of policy, and I think that that's something I will take forward with my team as well, to prioritise where those needs are. We've got a dashboard at the moment that we're working towards, but I think it would be worthwhile bringing it to yourselves to share that. And yeah, I believe there's a huge correlation as well. You'll see that there's a well-being part of the strategic action plan going forward. I think if we don't get that right, it's really difficult to engage people with health and safety. And so we want to build on that culture so that they feel considered, and that health and safety is not just part of another thing they have to do, but it's part of how we behave. And so that's really what we're working towards with this strategy. Work that the health and safety policy, there's a small team within my team who are working on policy, and a small team within my team who are working on training development. And I think coupled with that and the collaboration that we've already got going on with wellbeing leads, hopefully that will help to meet some of the recommendations that were also highlighted in the HMICS report. An action plan from the strategic plan will come to this committee again, just to keep you abreast of where we are and what progression we've made. So happy to take any questions.
Comments or questions from my board member colleagues? No. Should I be worried about the red and ambers that are in the 21-24 reporting?
I think some of those have probably just been you know, I've had a look through all of the risk, and no, I think that they were there. I think it's just different approaches to the strategic plan. I think what the reds really indicate is that there is maybe some work still to be done, and we're aware of that. And what we've done is we've continued to address this in the new strategic action plan. So any of the areas that are identified as red have been carried forward to make more continuous improvement on that.
And when you're reporting to us, will you think about time-bound objectives so that we get a sense of when things should be implemented by and how it will be?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, if I've got no further comments or questions, I'm going to thank you, Dawn, very much indeed
Thank you.
for that very important piece of work. We have postponed the Inspectorate of Education, the Modern Apprenticeship review, and we'll look forward to having that at our next meeting. So we're back with you, Katie, in terms of the biannual leadership and talent report.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll take the report as read. A couple of pieces that I would call out is My Career. So that's 12 months since Police Scotland launched My Career. There was a piece of analysis undertaken at the end of that 12 months with some recommendations taken forward in respect of continuous improvement. So we're moving forward with those. Your Leadership Matters. We have the steering group that remains in place at the moment. 2.2.4 talks to completion rates and 2.2.5 to overall evaluation. We recognise the comments particularly from the Scottish Police Federation, who we're working with in respect of one of the modules, so particularly module 3 and how that's landing. So when we look at the overall evaluation, we can see that the evaluation for that module is significantly lower than modules 1 and 2. So we've undertaken a piece of work to review that. In addition to which, the Federation did ask us to look at whether or not we could move from online digital delivery to in-person. Again, some work was undertaken with that, and that would not be possible to do. It's both time prohibitive but also cost prohibitive, and the abstraction rates, particularly for officers, would just not make that possible. But what we have done is we've looked at consolidation events at the end and trying to put those into much more local in-person. So we've tried to accommodate some of their request. I would then just call out the People Manager Development Programme. So there was a pilot that was undertaken on that. If Your Leadership Matters is around the values and behaviours of leaders, the People Manager Development Programme is much more around how to deal with absence, how do you support well-being, what's the policy in relation to grievances, etc. So we've had 177 colleagues have participated in that so far. That's getting very good evaluation. And actually overall now we start to move that number up, to around over 300 that have now completed that. The other key piece I'd call out is in relation to mediation. So as we move forward with an organisation for understanding much more around the insight, particularly around grievances and how we can get to a preventative place of workforce resolution, we have 20 trained mediators internally now in the organisation, with a further 12 being trained in the next coming months. So far, they've intervened in 12 particular situations. This is a cultural change for us as an organisation, rather than moving to a place of policy and grievance. But how do we become more accepting and welcoming of mediation as an intervention for us? What we'll look to do is to launch that mediator network much more so when we go live with the new grievance policy. So we're almost there. We're in agreement with the unions. There's a couple of points we need to get over the line in our agreement, but then we will launch a new grievance policy. And with that, we will have the wraparound support of the mediators. So I'm happy to take any questions in relation to the paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Very comprehensive reporting and responsiveness to issues that are raised, and the evaluation obviously is going to be key and critical to it. Members, any comments or questions? No. Colleagues, any comments or questions? Okay, so we're noting that, but I think I'm particularly, bring in Rob, I'm particularly keen to see the evaluation, so where people are thoughtful about how it works, but clearly you're saying if something's not evaluating well, then you'll respond and change and move that forwards. Rob, you've got a comment?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, just welcome the iterative approach that the service is taking to these leadership products, Your Leadership Matters work, etc. I think that's something that's to be commended. We recognise, that we're on a journey in terms of these products, and I guess The only point I would offer a different perspective on is around about in-person training. So the in-person leadership products used to certainly be a feature at almost every promoted rank in the service. So it's not so much that we can't and haven't done these things before, it's we're making a conscious choice not to do them, because there are cost implications. But again, these things were built into how we went about our business, even to an extent pre-pandemic. And I get through custom and practice, we've all become so accustomed to doing our business the way that the meeting is progressing this morning online. It doesn't always mean that that's the optimum solution to these things as well. So we would continue to encourage the service to look at that more blended model where appropriate, using in-person training. And I know that those discussions are taking place.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Rob. Lorna?
Yeah, obviously just to raise that as well, and to say perhaps if we're going to have them online, we could consider reducing the numbers, because I think what was prohibitive to the experience of officers on the course was the number of delegates that were logged in, and sometimes that naturally means people switch off because there's so many they're not going to miss me, comes the sort of reaction.
Okay, thanks. Katie, I wonder if it would be helpful for us to see a report on some of that. So particularly looking at impact assessment from an EDI point of view, in terms of how is that taken into account, and then the other mechanisms of which I hadn't thought of before, but if Lorna's saying, what's the maximum number? So I think it would be helpful in slower order if we could get a position paper commenting on that, so the steps that have been taken to mitigate against some of the anxieties, and because at the end of the day we need the best possible leadership cohort as we can, and it would be helpful, I think, to take that forwards.
We can definitely do that. So obviously there was an evaluation done around the feasibility of online. So we're just talking Your Leadership Matters. Is the particular offering that the Federation rightly have been pushing us, and so they should to be saying, is there something different you could be doing in this space? So we can certainly bring that to the People Committee. In addition to that, we do have a full evaluation pack that is assessed and reviewed at our Your Leadership Matters steering group. So there's no reason why that can't come forward. As I say, that goes to every steering group, so we can bring that forward as well. I think more broadly, I think perhaps part of the difference with Your Leadership Matters is the numbers. So a number of the leadership offerings that you'll see within the report are smaller numbers of officers and staff. That, here we're talking about kind of 5,500. And there's something as an organisation that if we rolled that out and we made it smaller numbers, although we will look at that, we will be well past autumn of this year. We will be well into 2025. So you'll be at a point where we've been 2 years, 2.5 years potentially at rolling out a leadership programme. So we need to get it right. But also for me, there is a piece about us kind of bringing Your Leadership Matters, the 3 modules, to conclusion, and then thinking what else as an organisation, because you don't just stop there just because people have been on 3 modules and a consolidation session. It's then what happens around 360 feedback, a leadership objective, short life working groups, how we bring networks of leaders together, etc. So that's almost the next phase of work that we need to get into as well. But we can bring papers back, Chair. Yeah.
Okay. That's grand. Thanks very much indeed for that. I think we're still with you in terms of the recruitment and vetting.
Yes, thank you. So this was a report that committee had asked for on recruitment and protected characteristic impact. What I will say in relation to this is, and this is called out in the report, and this also talks to the previous piece around recruitment and the candidate experience. But in May 2022, 1,000 applicants, with the attrition rates that we have, so different points at which applicants fall out of a process, would have resulted in 345 candidates. So 1,000 applicants convert into 345 candidates. In April 2023, that same 1,000 applicants would have resulted in 160 successful applicants. So you can start to see over the course of just that 1 year how much harder we are having to work as an organisation in order to convert applications to successful police officer candidates. So what that starts to mean when we look at the numbers, so we've agreed that we're going to move to more frequent intakes for officers over this year. It then means that the teams need to get, you know, kind of double, 3 times the amount of applicants in order to fulfill the pipeline of officers. The only other pieces I would call out then is 2.1 has got a wealth of data in there, an insight around an overview of police officer recruitment. So this was from June 2021 to September 23. And what we can see there is 62% male, 38% female. And we can see within that time frame as well that the total number of recruits, 8.3% were Black minority or white minority ethnic. That is against a backdrop of 4.1% of the Scottish population. In addition to that, we look at that overall that period, 6.4% of applicants identify within LGBT community, and that is against an ONS statistic of about 1.9% in the UK. So I know that there is more that we need to continue to do around the diversity of recruitment. But I think what I would say is when you look at the numbers in relation to external statistics and particularly the Scottish population and the diversity of the population that we are recruiting from, our statistics actually are not bad at all. Now, I'm not saying that's not good enough. There is always more we can do. The only other piece I would call out is 2.2 actually gives a very good overview of the attrition rates of candidates. So what that shows is that from shortlist through to all of the different stages that we would take people through to medical referral of where we are losing candidates. And you can see that from May 2022 to April 23. So for example, under medical deferral, you've seen in May 2022, 30% of candidates would have been lost at that point. That's gone up to 47% in April 23. So that starts to talk to my very first statistic about the number of candidates that we require in order to get successful offers. That medical uplift, if you like, would be very reflective, I think, of the Scottish population in terms of individuals who are taking medication related to mental health. So I think, Fiona, you're probably going to correct me, but I think that the statistic is 1 in 7 citizens at the moment, the thinking is would be taking some sort of medication for a psychological illness. So I guess I'm just trying to put some context here around some of the work. The last thing that I will call out is I know as an organisation, we talk about the PAT team. So the kind of the positive action team, that's 3 officers in that team. We cannot, as an organisation, expect 3 officers to be fixing all of this for us. All of us plays a part in this, all of us. And recruitment is just the first part of this. There's then the whole employee life cycle. So we've touched before about how we onboard people. What's the probationary training, the readiness, their first deployment? What's the experience of colleagues when they're working with us? What's their promotion? What's the career development? So this point of this report is just the very first point around the responsibility that each and every one of us has in relation to attracting but retaining the diversity of staff within our organisation. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Katie. And it's good to see this paper coming here and some of the very encouraging stats and data that we've got. Paul.
Yeah, I have to say I love reading stats.
You're a scientist.
And the thing is, what strikes me is the sustained performance is maybe the wrong word, but the sustained levels of BME, WME recruits that you've had, certainly since I've joined the board, which I think is is to be welcomed. And I'm always reading across the census results and ONS results for Scotland and elsewhere. So I think the three officers you're mentioning that oversee this aspect have done very, very well with that. What I am concerned about, though, is, and I wanted also to touch on the remarks that you were saying about retention afterwards, because the attrition rates only talk about recruitment attrition rates, not attrition rates going forward, which is, you know, having done the difficult bit of getting them through the door, how can we keep hold of more diverse staff more? What I am concerned about, though, is it's like a drop like a stone in terms of the percentage of women recruits from the 18th of April. So if it's gone below 40% from July onwards, and it just seems to be going down and down and down, and I do have a concern about that. What is the reason for that? Because it's you know, we were 50% in June 2001, and it's now half of that in terms of percentage in last September. So is there something happening there we need to know about?
Yeah, we have tried to call this out in some of the conclusions, and I do think that there's more work that we need to do in relation to that. We had an independent person who undertook what we call a recruitment MOT. That's his product that he uses, and there was a wealth of insight from there in terms of his findings, some of which are around our brand in the employment market. So policing, not just Police Scotland, but policing generally, and that's not only as a job but also as a career, and how that looks and feels at the moment nationally. That's challenging. The other piece is within geographies, we will see different areas of competition for candidates. So Aberdeen is going to look different to Edinburgh, for example, and that's why in part I've come back to this time to recruit, particularly if we take Edinburgh market, a lot of financial services organisations, there are particular skills we are going to be in competition for. If we are taking 200 plus days to turn around an offer, we have lost that candidate. We know that financial service institutes will do that in 4 weeks. So there's a piece there for us where we need to step up. We also know that we can start to see some of the nuances, for example, around the fitness days and what that might look like in terms of gender. There's pieces to do then around the medicine piece in the assessment, and to what extent that may or may not be impacting not only gender but also ethnicity, disability of candidates, etc. So there's a big piece there for us. And I do think it comes back to what policing is, that in terms of what we've touched on earlier around shift patterns. So I think it's a complex answer, Paul, that it's difficult to nail. But
they haven't all got worse in the last 3 years. And that's what concerns me, is 3 years ago, we managed a 50-50 recruitment of gender, and it hasn't got worse. And 38% is not the same as 50% of the population, which you'd expect. And we have a chief constable that's female, deputy chief constable that's female. That, that surely must at some stage, and it's early days, must at some stage be attractive. And that example there, you have positive role models there to build a career on.
Yeah. I think we need to do more on this to understand it. What we do know is that proportion of female applicants we have is proportionate to those that are getting through and successfully appointing. So actually that points to is not getting the attraction of the applicants in the first place. And and that's more work we need to do.
Yeah, that's my concern, because I go abroad to other countries and I see an awful lot of female police officers on the beat, etc. And so anyway, that's me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. If we've got no one else, I have a couple of, I suppose, just following that up on the female candidates. I was curious in terms of 2.5 about the intention of saying, I wondered, should I be concerned that there's an institutional discrimination point of view here? Are we rolling over and saying, well, women don't really want to come into the police force anyway, so we'll just leave it because, it's the same but opposite in the NHS? I was interested to know the thought process behind the inclusion of the comparison to the NHS. Interested to know if you're going to learn from some of the active work that's taken, but also, is there actually it's okay for men to do it but not okay for women?
No, and that's definitely not the intention of including that. I think the intention of including that, so in the recruitment MOT, actually, perhaps if I can come back to that, there are a number of comparator organisations that the individual brought forward, and actually in terms of even thinking about imagery that we use in our recruitment. So, you know, we've kind of got the stock pictures, if you like, but actually it's the language that we use as well. So he did a very nice piece of analysis that talked about the Navy, the Army, the NHS, education, and actually a lot of visual imaging and words that are being used. But in addition to that, also looked at things like, you know, how many click-throughs it takes a candidate to get to the information they want to get to. So, for example, if we know it's important that there's flexibility that's offered for female candidates, how quickly do we put that up front? So what I suppose what we're doing at the moment, together with the work from Emma Bond on tackling misogyny and sexism, is trying to pull through that insight to say, how is it then that we start to really position our brand? I think as an organisation, and I'm hoping I'm not going to get the number wrong, but I think we spent £40,000 last year on recruitment campaigns. That was it. You cannot, of an organisation of our size, expect us to be able to step forward with that brand, with the candidate experience, and to get the numbers that we need. You know, this is a really kind of, you know, specialist area of work in terms of recruitment and building campaigns, direct attraction, etc. So we have had agreements that we can apply for reform funding to try and increase that, because I think there's a huge amount of work. There's some really nice applications out there, tech applications, that will look at what candidates are reading on screens and what words they're dwelling on. And actually, what that then starts to tell you is what's important words and language for different diversity of candidates that are reading our information. And that's the competitive market that we're in at the moment, that as an organisation we need to step up and think about in terms of candidates. And
enabling pieces. So we've talked about flexibility. I think there's been not quite an undercurrent, but actually the whole issue, rightly so, we need to provide a service. But if 40% of the women in, whether warranted officer or Police Scotland staff, wanted to work 20 hours, then how are we going to backfill that? And how are we going to get, you know, more part-time workers into the organisation if we have your very clunky, well, it takes a year and everyone has to come and go to Tullyallen for 12 weeks away from their families and they have to do it full time? I'm just wondering, will that be something we'll see in the Strategic Workforce Plan, Katie?
Well, we do talk in the Strategic Workforce Plan. There are a number of commitments and outcomes in there, but I think the commitments in there for the first iteration of the SWP were more around understanding the current as is and what the dynamics are, because I think as an organisation, you know, Emma's found it through her work that actually that start point has been discovery. So some of what we thought was driving, you know, some of what we're seeing, all the insights, actually isn't the case. It's something else completely different. So I know, Chair, it frustrates you when I say that, you know, we're still having to build this insight, but particularly in relation to recruitment, you know, I do think as an organisation, we do need to step back and think, you know, a multi-generational workforce requires us to be thinking really differently about our employment proposition. And perhaps we've stood still a little bit on, you know, it's 12 weeks at Tullyallen, it's full time, 200 plus days is fine, they'll wait. And actually, we just can't anymore. You know, there's kind of a fire under our feet now to say, you know, we really need to think of about what that looks like. If we go out to universities or colleges or schools and we talk to, you know, a particular age demographic, what they want from an employer, and the research is showing us, is very, very different to, you know, kind of 40, 50, etc. What I would say, though, is the one thing that we have, which other organisations don't have, is that sense of purpose. So, you know, we see it across public sector, but policing has a unique sense of purpose that no other organisation except other forces can replicate. And that's the bit for us. If we can get that right and we can really land on that compelling brand around why it's important, then actually that for me is one of the biggest attraction pieces that we have. Then we need to follow through with the colleague experience.
Okay, that's grand. I'm coming to an end of this. I would very much look forward to the assessment of health and well-being, the medical deferrals that we have in terms of making sure that it's been properly reviewed, and from an impact assessment point of view, particularly disability is taken into account. The fitness piece, two things. One, a lot of women are feeling their fitness, but the other aspect is, do we, once you're in, are you then assessing, just thinking about that multi-generational piece, does a level of fitness have to be maintained? So I'm asking, is the bar too high? And I don't have a view because I don't actually know what the fitness standards are. And also, do we have to keep, if we have a bar for recruitment, do we then keep that up for the 35 years of service? And I know you're going to tell me, Katie, that people don't want to work for the same employer for 35 years, and we need to get used to that. But for instance,
I am actually, as much as I know about the fitness test, is when I hear the bleep test happening in Tullyallen. If I can, I think Emma, ACC Bond, is still on the call. And I'm wondering, is she still on the call? Or she is. And I'm wondering whether or not Emma could speak to the fitness aspect and the ongoing requirements, if there are any. Thank you.